Well, welcome back to part 3 of my series on metabolic health. So, in order for this to make sense, I suggest that you go back a couple of episodes and watch part 1 and then part 2, which is the podcast, the episode right before this one. I will make sure to link to those in the show notes. So there's so much to cover with metabolic health, and we're actually not going to cover everything. There's the sleep. I'm going to touch lightly on the stress aspect today because I think it's important. But there's the movement, the exercise, such as cardio, and there is the resistance training aspect of exercise. There's the liver health, and there's several types of ways to support your liver. I covered those in part 1. And then there is the nutrition. And when I was deciding what to focus on this, I thought, okay, the 3 ones that really stand out to me are the liver health, the strength training, because it can have such an impact on our metabolic health, and the research is very strong that supports it, and then the nutrition. So we're going to dive into the nutrition aspect today and how we can eat to support metabolic health. And you may be thinking, oh, I know this already, just bear with me. There's always things we can learn. There's things that I learned as I was preparing for this podcast. So stay with me and we'll dive right in. All right, so nutrition. We know that maintaining a healthy diet is important for overall health, but it has a huge impact on our metabolic health. And diet is potentially a big part of glucose, blood sugar stabilization and regulation. I've mentioned many times on the podcast how when women go through perimenopause, they start to have fluctuations in estrogen in particular. And then we cross the threshold into menopause, we can have some blood sugar dysregulation. This can lead to insulin resistance and a loss of insulin sensitivity, which can in turn set us up for certain chronic diseases. Not every woman is going to develop insulin resistance, and some will cross into that threshold more easily, I guess, for lack of a better word, than others. So I'm not making generalizations here because individuality, bioindividuality is huge. Our genetics and of course our lifestyle factors are a big part of this as well. So looking at carbohydrates, because when we eat carbohydrates, or really when we eat a meal in general, we're going to get a blood sugar spike. This is not abnormal. And in particular with carbohydrates, we're going to get a bigger spike. Now, the more refined and ultra processed those carbohydrates are, the higher in sugar they are, the more of a spike we're going to get. So we want to look at minimizing ultra processed food and minimizing added sugars. So first of all, reading labels. Now, there's a huge debate right now, and if you are on Instagram and you follow various people as I do, because I actually like to get opposing opinions. So it's interesting. I follow people who have opinions that are opposing to one another. And I find that the truth lies somewhere in the middle, I do believe. There is the research, and research can show us certain things, and some research will say, ultra processed food doesn't have a huge effect. Other research will say, yes, it does. And I've even seen people on social media saying, well, don't demonize ultra processed food. It's not that bad. Others saying you should eliminate it altogether. The fact is, all of us eat processed food in one way or another. We eat refined food. If you are making jasmine rice, okay, that's been packaged, it's been prepared for the store, it has been processed and refined. Even your hamburger, chicken, things like that, they're packaged. They've had to be processed in some way or another. What you don't want is things that are overly processed. You want to avoid as much of this as you can. You want as many whole foods in the diet. And I think even these two opposing camps agree on this, that a diet that is higher in whole nutritious food is going to be better for you. It's going to be more filling. So nutritious food, it tends to, not always, of course, the fats, are going to be high in calories, 9 calories per gram, as opposed to 4 calories per gram with carbohydrates and 4 with protein. But many of the unprocessed foods, you can eat more of them and not have as much of a calorie spike as you would with the ultra processed foods. So think about fast foods. Those meals are going to be extremely high in sodium, the wrong type of fats, and in also calories. And so if you eat more naturally, and when I say naturally, I say it with kind of quote marks around it, because again, we go to the supermarket, we buy things, and they're in packages. They've been processed to some degree. But when that's minimized, in general, you're going to be able to actually eat more, and it's going to be more filling than going and filling up on, trying to fill up on a bag of chips. I don't know about you, but I eat a few chips and it's like, okay, that I'm still hungry. And I want to do a little bit of a disclaimer here, because occasionally I have chips and salsa. Occasionally I have French fries. Occasionally I have a dessert. But the rule of thumb here is we're looking at moderation. I don't have these things in excessive amounts. I'm not eating it every meal all the time, every single day. And, I was recently talking with a woman. She was so concerned because she had gone out for a burger and fries, and she hadn't had a burger and fries in ages. And she had it, and she was really concerned about actually, what do I do the next day now that I've eaten this? And I don't want you to stress. Occasionally you split a dessert with your significant other, you have a piece of wedding cake or birthday cake, or you have a few fries and a hamburger. It's not like your health is going to suffer significantly from doing these things occasionally. Once again, it is the load. Seed oils, I feel the same way about. I try to avoid them, but I know they sneak in. I like to go out to eat with my husband. I'm sure not every restaurant that I frequent is going to be seed oil free. Am I proponent of seed oils? No, I feel like we should be getting our fats from other sources, from olive oil, from nuts, from nut butters, from things such as that, or even from certain types of fatty cuts of meat and salmon and different types of fish that are a little fattier are going to be healthier than, loading up on processed food, which is full of seed oils. But once again, we have to not stress ourselves out. So this was the stress I was talking about. You can stress yourself out by trying to be perfect. And that's not going to help your metabolic health, because we know that ongoing chronic stress is not good for metabolic health. We get a spike in cortisol. We get a spike in blood sugar. It's more difficult for your body to regulate blood glucose because it goes high with stress. So I don't want you to take what I'm saying and feel like I'm judging or feel like I'm perfect, because I'm not. And I want you to just think in terms of, how can I do better? There's good, there's better, there's best. How can I go from good to better? How can I, be best? And best doesn't necessarily mean 100% perfect. It means that most of the time you're following certain principles with your diet. So I really wanted to include that in there because I think it's so important. So carbs are in almost everything we eat. And the standard American diet, as I mentioned, is full of refined carbs, processed foods, and added sugars. And you must be mindful about what you're taking in. So this means that you're going to be maybe tracking your food using an app like MyFitnessPal or Chronometer. Maybe you're looking at the labels and reading the labels for added sugar. You're looking for, okay, there's a bunch of words on here I can't pronounce, so maybe my body doesn't recognize these things and I don't need to put these things into my body. Opting for whole foods is the easiest way to eliminate these added sugars. and work up to reducing the refined foods. If you're used to having a lot of refined flours, in particular in the form of breads and different products, think about slowly moving out away from those things and then replacing it with something else. I think it's really important. Sometimes I don't know, I'll have a snacking craze, and I have it at a weird time for me. It's usually 4 in the afternoon, and we don't eat early because my husband gets home late from work. He works long hours. We own our own business. He's out there, selling work, doing work. So we don't eat at 5 o'clock. And so at 4 o'clock, I'll get this kind of snacky thing going on. And I'll try to think, what is my best option here? What's going to really be best for me? And, it might be a protein shake with a brown rice cake and a little nut butter on it. And I'm thinking, okay, that's better than me pulling out the chips and the salsa and just mindlessly eating chips or sugary foods for that matter. So, blood sugar spikes and crashes have physiological effects. And here are just a few. You're going to have that fatigue, that brain fog. You might feel shaky. You might get that hangry feeling in between meals. And it actually might make the cravings even worse. The more you get those crazy spikes, the worse the craving. So, you want to avoid this intense variability that will likely give you more energy if you are more stable with your blood sugar levels. Now, science has shown that carbs turn into glucose. This is a fact, which is when you eat, and which is like a quick form of sugar for your body. That's what glucose is. It raises your blood sugar. It causes excess insulin to be released, and high insulin over the course of time can lead to insulin resistance, where your body doesn't recognize it anymore, and eventually type 2 diabetes. Now, there's a debate about how bad processed food is. I talked about that. But I think we can all agree that whole foods are better, and that eating sugar all the time is certainly not going to help how you look, how you feel, the function of your brain. It's not going to help your health. So I think we can all agree on that and not, get into a huge debate over processed foods and what's good and what's bad in the research. But we know less about why glucose levels seem to affect some people more than others. So we know less about precisely what glucose levels are normal and what glucose levels are healthy for the general population, and why some people become insulin resistant or why some people get pre-diabetic and diabetic. So there's some unknowns here still in the research, but your blood glucose levels rise typically and fall throughout the day. That's going to be very normal. How much it increases and how rapidly it falls and how often it falls and how often these spikes occur is really important to your metabolic health. We expect small changes over the course of the day, but large swings can have a negative consequence on our bodies and our metabolic health. When you eat a meal, your body turns the carbohydrates into glucose, like I said, a simple sugar that powers your cells. And that extra glucose in your bloodstream triggers the release of the hormone that I talked about, which helps your body use the blood glucose, the blood sugar, for fuel, or your body's going to store it for later. Now, this cycle of eating, taking in glucose, then burning or storing is going to go on throughout the day, along with these blood sugar rises and falls, and things like how well we slept, whether or not we took a walk today, whether or not we were resistance training, whether or not we have muscle on our bodies, is going to influence your blood sugar levels. But really, what you eat is a big driver of this. So we can make the right kind of choices. And then if we add in the resistance training, we add in some walking, like maybe 10 to 15 minutes after a meal, we can achieve that insulin sensitivity. So these glucose highs, these glucose lows are called glycemic variability. Now, the goal for metabolic health is to keep your glycemic variability, say that fast a few times. I'm telling you, I'm reading it in my notes and I'm getting tongue-tied. um, is is to keep that variability looking more like this kind of gentle up and down. Think of rolling hills. I used to go cycling all the time, and my favorite thing was the rolling hills. We would go up in the mountains. See how I get off track, but I'm going somewhere with this. I would go up in the mountains, and I absolutely my body loved those gentle rolling hills because it was just enough of an uphill and just short enough where it gave me a little bit of intensity. And then you got that reward of going down the other side. What I didn't like was to climb for, 2, 3 hours and then, fly back down that hill. It was such an extreme. My husband really liked flying down that hill, but I didn't like those extremes. And I feel like our body doesn't like those peaks and deep, deep valleys either. Now, when we go into those spikes, these blood sugar spikes that occur when we consume more glucose, more sugar, more refined carbohydrates at once than your body can handle. And your body can only handle so much. It can only shuttle so much into the cells, into the muscles. So the concentration in your blood will rise sharply, and that's what we don't want. Now, the other side is that crash. Think about going down the hill. What comes up must go down. And I remember my husband saying that to me when we bike ride, because I didn't like the out of control feeling, because these were steep, steep hills. We would climb to the top of the Sandias on our bikes on the backside using the regular road that the car would use. And it would take a long time to get to the top. It was switchbacks back and forth and back and forth. You think it would never end. And then you'd have this radical going downhill where you felt like you had to control the cycle going down so that you didn't wipe out. And it's almost a little bit scary. But I remember my husband saying, well, what goes up must come down. And it's the same with those blood glucose spikes. With too much insulin, and your blood sugar will fall. It will go below baseline for a while. So way up, way down. Now, if this just keeps happening, if it happens once in a while, okay, our bodies can deal with that. But if it's over the long term, this high variability is linked with certain diseases. It's been linked with certain type of cancer. Cancer is very complex. I am not even going to try to unpack that one for you, because really there's such a variance between the cancers, between individuals. The research is ever emerging. It's pretty complex, but there has been a link with some. Definitely a link with cardiovascular disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, and just an increased risk of mortality in general. This high glycemic ups and downs variability can damage cells over time and lead to this metabolic dysfunction. It's almost like watching dominoes go blah, 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 all the way down, or a house of cards. And this process often begins with insulin resistance. So we know there's consequences. These are a few. Insulin resistance, I talked about. Vascular dysfunction. Now, blood sugar spikes can have a negative effect on the blood vessels. The lining and the surrounding muscles begin to malfunction, and this leads to problems in the actual blood flow and blood pressure. Over time, this can lead to heart disease. If you go all the way back to part 1 of this metabolic series, metabolic health series, I talked about some markers to watch out with your doctor, in conjunction with your doctor, and to talk with your doctor about, or your healthcare provider, whoever that might be. And one of those markers was blood pressure, chronically high blood pressure. So we can see how sugar could affect us in a vascular way and lead to that oxidative stress. This is something that is often not completely understood. It's words that are thrown around, but basically you're talking about elevated blood sugar that triggers the creation of inflammatory, well, they're compounds, for lack of a better word, cytokines and C-reactive protein. You may have seen C-reactive protein on your blood test. Now, there are other measures of inflammation. That's not the only one. So I recommend working with somebody who will look at these different markers of inflammation. But this oxidative stress, this continual stress on our cells, on our mitochondria, over time is going to cause inflammation. And we know that as we age, we get inflammation just by the aging process. I don't think it's fully understood why, but it has something to do with the cells. Reactive oxygen species, volatile molecules that can damage your DNA. These types of things damage our cellular health and lead to serious disease. I recently ran a 7-day challenge called the Ageless Challenge. Now, I am going to put the link to the guide for that challenge in the show notes, because what I've done is, even though the challenge is done and the Facebook group is closed, you can still grab that guide and do the challenge on your own. And I really recommend it because I cover everything about cellular health in there. Even skincare is in there, because women, we care about our skin, how we look. Our skin is taking in a lot of stress, a lot of toxins. And so I do discuss that. We hit on things kind of lightly because it's just a 7-day challenge. So it's not like a deep dive into every single thing, but it'll get you started in the right direction. So you might want to check that out. That is in the show notes, the link to grab that free guide. A cognitive decline, especially among older adults, and poor memory. In young people, the mechanisms behind this are not really fully understood, but we know that the brain is more sensitive to glucose levels. So high glycemic variability, I'm getting better at saying that, may cause damage to the blood vessels that nourish the brain. Now, glucose in and of itself is not a bad thing. Our brains need glucose. Our brains need the energy and the sugar. And eating carbohydrates at the right time, like before or after a workout, can be beneficial, especially if you're doing strength training sessions, a big leg day. You get a lot of energy from your carbs. And this is an interesting story, but years and years ago, before I was diagnosed with rheumatoid disease, rheumatoid arthritis, which is an inflammatory condition, it is an autoimmune disease. I was training for a bodybuilding fitness show, and I was working with a coach, and I began to have some weird just various symptoms. Had my blood work done and found that my kidneys were being strained. And later on, I found out through the kidney doctor, he said that's often one of the first signs that he saw of rheumatoid disease. He said even years ago, they didn't have doctors that specialized in that. They actually would go to the kidney doctor when they had this disease. And so I didn't realize all this until I was in the midst of it. It's something that I believe was coming on in the years where I was not doing the right thing and under, a lot of stress and just trying to do too many things, really overworking my body, my mind, not sleeping in the middle of perimenopause. And I feel personally, I don't have proof of this, that was a perfect storm. And when they diagnosed me, they said, this is a case that's been developing a long time. Well, at the time I got it, I had changed a lot of my lifestyle habits, but it was still pretty recent. I believe I'm wanting to say I was 53 at the time of diagnosis. I think it was about 53. And I was preparing for not a national show, but I was preparing for a show in San Jose. We found the problem with my kidneys. So long story short, my practitioner at the time recommended maybe cutting back a bit on the protein. Now, that's another one of those hot topics. Protein in and of itself does not cause kidney failure, so I don't want you to run out and cut all your protein because you think your kidneys are suffering. But if you're already strained, it is my understanding, and now there's a lot of debate on this as well, that it could be taxing to overdo that protein. So I still had a a higher protein diet, but I didn't have as high of a protein diet. And for bodybuilding and building muscle, it wasn't optimal. So my coach raised my carbohydrates and lowered my protein. So I was getting enough protein, but I wasn't getting an excess, and I had more carbohydrates in my diet. And I actually made some great gains. It was an interesting thing that happened to my body. Now, I think if I had continued on, probably the gains would not have continued on, but it was interesting to see. And I remember my coaches just being fascinated by the whole thing. So, long story short, carbohydrates are not the enemy, and you shouldn't be avoiding them. What you should be looking at is the quantity. Timing can be important. If you eat a huge carb-laden meal and then lay down, and your blood sugars had a huge spike, probably not a good idea. So you want to look at, the type of carbohydrates, the timing. Now, I will sometimes have a small amount of one in the evening for dinner, and research has shown that really that doesn't have a huge effect on weight loss, in particular fat loss. But I am mindful of what type of carbohydrate I'm eating in the evening and how much. So they're not the enemy, but you do want to be mindful and aware. And I can tell you this, my body, as I've gotten older, just doesn't handle a real hard, high carb load like it did, say 10, 15, 20 years ago. So I eat more of a moderate carbohydrate intake, enough to fuel my energy, my training. It helps me sleep. It can have a calming effect and is supportive of the thyroid as well. So that is a brief kind of a brief overview of nutrition, the effects on metabolic health. If you want to take your fitness, I don't like saying fitness journey, but I feel like there's like no other better word than journey, because that's really what it is. It's not a destination. You're on a journey, and you need a roadmap for that journey. So imagine you get in the car and you have no idea where you're going someplace new. And it's someplace where you got to go through construction, and you got to get different roads and roads you're not familiar with. Of course, you're going to bring up your Google Maps, and it's going to show you the best, quickest route and take you through, hopefully, the quickest route to get safely to your destination. You wouldn't think these days of just getting in the car and mindlessly driving around the city, hoping you came across the right turns and roads and streets. You would want that map. In the old days, we had the big paper maps. I remember those, my dad taking it out. I swear I could not read that thing. It's kind of funny that I think it was a man thing, really, these maps. And now we have the Google. So I am giving you an equivalent of Google Maps with my membership, Faith Plus Fitness. You can learn more. The link to learn more and to sign up is in the show notes. And it is just like it sounds. There is a faith component, is the Christian faith, and it is combined with health and fitness. Because for me, I have to have a holistic approach to things. I can't put things into individual containers. I can't go, well, now I'm at church. Now I'm a churchy religious person. Well, now I'm at the gym. Now I'm a workout person. Well, now I'm eating this meal. Now I'm really into nutrition. To me, it goes all together. It is your mental, your physical, your emotional, your spiritual health. And it's taken me a long time to understand that holistic process. I understand people have different faiths. Some people don't have a faith. They don't believe anything. I still invite you to check out the membership. That component of the membership is there for you to embrace if you want to. If you just want to focus on the nutrition, the recipes, and the workouts, because every month you get new workouts, you can do that too. Nobody's going to be looking over your shoulder, forcing you to be doing anything, but there will be that spiritual part of the membership in there, that support. I will just end with this. So in my church recently, we did a 3-part series about focusing and choosing our thoughts and taking our thoughts captive and really meditating on what is good, what is pure, what is right, getting the negative out. And I feel like this is a message everybody can embrace. And it's helped me immensely. So every day I do like a short reading, there's a verse. I read through. I have a little notebook. I take a few notes, like 10, 15 minutes in the morning. Sets the tone of my day. It's a reminder to focus on these types of things. And then I have a podcast that I listen to that is faith-based. And it's a woman, and the teachings are really for women. I mean, men could listen too, but they're aimed at women. That's been really helpful with helping me control my thoughts because I'm a person. I have high anxiety, not all the time. I've gotten a lot better at controlling that, but I used to have panic attacks back in the day, generalized anxiety. It's so much better when I take my thoughts captive. And that's what I want to share with you. I want to bring that positivity into your life. So go to the show notes. There's the free resource, there's the membership. If you have questions, you can contact me on Instagram at Carol Covino Fitness. Every once in a while, those get thrown into like the junk folder. So I have taken to going into my, I don't forget what you call it, the messages that are hidden messages, just to make sure I don't miss somebody's questions. But if there's a delay, that's why it doesn't always automatically pop up on my main feed. You can also send me an email, carol@carolcovino.com. So we're headed into the new year, 2025. Listen to the 3-part series. The links to the other 2 parts are in the bio. Don't try to do all the things. Setting goals is great. And I used to be against the whole setting goal thing in the new year. I've actually kind of changed my perspective on that because you know what? Goals are great. Setting a fresh perspective, taking a new route on things is great. What's not great is how we do it sometimes. We try to do it in an unrealistic manner that isn't going to work for us. You know, if we say I'm going to do an hour of yoga, run 10 miles, and go to the gym an hour every day, like that's not realistic. Not that that's what you're doing, but choose what's realistic for you and start with one thing. Maybe you start with the resistance training, one of the most important things for metabolic health. Maybe you focus on your nutrition and taking some of those ultra processed foods out and finding better options. Maybe you look at the liver health segment, which was part 1, and choose one of those habits to focus on. You don't have to do it all at once. 2025, you got the whole year. That's the other thing. We're not doing it all in January, and we're not doing it all in 2025. That's just the jump start. This is for life. This isn't a destination, it is a journey. So happy New Year, and wherever you are in the world, I wish you every blessing. Bye for now.